Thank you all for coming here, and we'll spend the next 45 to 50 minutes talking about CCS, CCU, and DAC, trying to make a little bit of sense of why these technologies are important and what we need to actually make them happen. My name is Stefano De Clara, and I'm the head of secretariat at ICAP, the International Carbon Action Partnership. For those of you that are not familiar with ICAP, we are an organization that brings together 40 different governments that come together to work on the implementation of emission trading systems. And as a network of government, we do work on designing and launching and refining emission trading systems worldwide. Governments that operate and implement emission trading systems obviously look at the CCUS and DAC discussion quite closely. We mainly come, from an ETS point of view, even though I'm conscious that the discussion around these technologies is way broader than that. But we are doing quite a lot of work lately to understand how CCU, CCS, DAC, and removals more broadly can intersect the world of emission trading systems, and to what extent ETS can incentivize the deployment of these technologies. We've done work last year on this that I would encourage you to look at. We are still doing ongoing work on the integration between CCUS and ETS. So I'm pretty much here to learn today from different panelists and from different perspectives, what can be done to incentivize the deployment of these technologies. I'm pretty fortunate to have a really knowledgeable but also comprehensive panel, because in the four chairs next to me, you do have a good chunk of the CCUS and DAC value chain. As we will go through the panel today, you will get to understand where different sectors and different players fit into the broader discussion on these technologies. So as a way to quickly introduce them, to my left, we have Arthur Lee, Principal Advisor for Corporate Strategy and Sustainability at Chevron. Further down, we have JP Brisson, Partner and Global Co-Chair for environmental regulation transaction practice at Latham & Watkins. Then a bit further down, Kel Coulson, Policy and Engagement Lead at Carbon Engineering. And to round off the panel, we had Tony Cotton, Senior Director for Sales and Marketing at Oxy. Just to give you a quick sense of what brings different players into the CCUS and DAC space, and before we actually dive into the substance of the discussion, I will ask each panelist in a quick sentence of two to describe what they do and what their companies do, but also what brings them to the CCUS and DAC space. Arthur, can you kick us off?
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me and to be here to talk about, well, in my case, talk about CCS and a little bit broadly about Chevron's actions. I am a principal advisor and a Chevron fellow at my company. And what I do at the company is primarily look after technology and policy developments. And I started that journey, for example, with the Gorgon project, CO2 capture project operated by us, joint venture with ExxonMobil and Shell. It's a project that I've been involved in since the beginning, since 1998. So CCS has been in my blood for quite a long time, and it's something that I'm proud of continuing to advocate on. Thanks.
Thank you, JP.
Sure. Arthur is very humble. As we all know, he omitted to mention that he was part of the IPCC team that won the Nobel Peace Prize for its report a few years ago. So definitely someone very important. And I'm humbled to be next to you, Arthur. I am JP Brisson. I am a partner at Latham & Watkins in New York. I've done work in the climate space for about 25 years. In the CCS space, we have a team that advises clients on about 25 projects. Most of them are in the US, but some of them are in Europe and in the Middle East. So as lawyer, we help companies develop, structure, paper, CCS projects, which are, large infrastructure projects, and access to various incentives that exist around the globe for such projects. So pleasure to be here with such a notable panel. Over to Kel.
Hi, I'm Kel Colson from Carbon Engineering, and I joined Carbon Engineering about 10 months ago. My focus is looking at voluntary carbon markets as well as policies in aviation and marine to make sure that when policymakers are setting policy that want to include DAC, that we give them some guidance on the right incentives for that. Prior to joining Carbon Engineering, I was at the Canadian government in the Carbon Markets Bureau, and I was working on the Clean Fuel Standard and the Canadian Compliance Offset Program. So if you saw Jackie speak yesterday, I used to work on her team and it was really great. And then prior to that, I was at Chevron and I was working in the downstream team working on low carbon fuels. So my background is varied, but what brought me to direct air capture is that we both do sequestration and we also do low carbon fuels. So it's a great mix, and I'm excited to be here today.
Great. Hi, I'm Tony Catone. I've been with Occidental for about 10 years now, mostly on the finance and strategy side of the business. So I grew up on Wall Street, infrastructure, investment banking, and private equity. But since coming to Oxy, we formed Oxy Low Carbon Ventures. And so this has been a group focused on CCUS solely. When I originally joined the founding team here as a new group, I focused on that strategy and finance. And so that's everything from investing in climate technologies at a VC stage, much like Carbon Engineering is one of our main investments, as well as working through project financings of 45Q tax equity projects for CCUS here in the US. Currently, my role has sort of transitioned, and we're developing a large direct air capture facility out in West Texas. We can talk much more about that, but I'm responsible for the sales and marketing of those carbon dioxide removal credits.
Perfect then, and that will give you a sense, hopefully, of what kind of angles and interest bring different parts of the carbon market community to the CCUS and DAC discussion, and we spend the next half an hour or so diving a bit deeper into that, and we'll get started again with Arthur, and it'd be great if you could say a few more words about where CCS fit into Chevron's strategy. If we can get the slides to work.
Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you. Okay, before I dive right into CCS, I just want to give you a bigger picture from at least one company's perspective. A lot of this is all about net zero. In our case, we have set a upstream net zero target, part of which we have already achieved from a baseline of 2016. But as we continue to reduce our emission intensity in our portfolio, and also in the next 5 to 6 years, that will continue to decrease. But at the same time, we will have to look for innovation, and we're continuing to do that, emerging technologies, as well as carbon offsets. So in 2021, in August 21, we actually formed a wholly owned, a new subsidiary called Chevron New Energies. Some of the team members are actually here as well, mingling with you all. The New Energies is going to focus on three business lines. One will be on hydrogen, and part of that hydrogen production will be enabled by CCS. Some of it will be green hydrogen from electrification, but a part of that would be that CCS. That's the second business line, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And then third will be on offsets and emerging technologies, as well as our downstream portfolio now includes one of the biggest companies, which made us bigger in terms of renewable fuels, sustainable aviation fuel, and renewable diesel fuels. So all of that is actually now makes Chevron one of the largest renewable fuels company in the United States. So we have all these goals there. I won't get into a lot of details, but suffice to say that 25 million tons per year, that will be our 2030 targets, just on CCS alone. Let me continue. Oops. Okay, sorry about that. Just focusing a little bit on CCS now. That gave you a broader picture. Now I want to focus down. As I think anyone in our business knows, our industry is very much into partnerships. There are many things that that we cannot do or don't want to do or take all the risk ourselves, but want to share that risk as well as the reward with other partners. So in terms of technology collaborations, we certainly are out there really looking for partners that can also teach us at Chevron a lot more about CCUS. Even though we already have a lot of the subsurface capabilities, we also want to partner with a wide range of companies in terms of capture and transport and all along the value chain. So these are just some of the logos that I put up there. And of course, in our panel here, we have a partner, Carbon Engineering. Very grateful for partnering with them with their innovative technologies. Svante, who's not here, but Svante is another company that we're partnering in California to demonstrate in the project to demonstrate the rotating pack bed technology. Blue Planet is an investment that we've made that will use CO2 in terms of building materials, using that as a feedstock to make new building materials. And also we have partnerships with Singapore government and some of their agencies in terms of longer term research for decarbonizing, first of all, Singapore, but also help other countries in the region as well. So let me continue, and I will end very quickly. These are just more details about these projects. And my friend right here on the left, JP, is actually helping us on, have been helping us on some of these. Bayou Bend in Texas, I think that's a fairly well-known one now in terms of its potential to capture 225 to 275 million tons in that region. We'll be getting, I think, planning to get CO2 from the various industries in the area. Kern River, so it's more of a piloting project to look at two kinds of to look at actually just one technology, Svante, that I mentioned already. And McKittrick is two technologies from, I think, I don't even know all the names of the companies, Carbon Point Solutions, which actually is a technology that recirculate the CO2 to concentrate it. So normal concentration, let's say, is 5 to 11% from gas turbines. You can concentrate it up to 22%. And when the gas is that much more concentrated, it's much easier to separate. So these are some of the POP projects, and there's one that we will be all Chevron will be East Ridge. The East Ridge project will be something, a commercial scale project, where we will also sequester a commercial scale amount of CO2 in our own fields, again in California. So I'll just end there. I don't want to hog up all the time. So thank you.
Thanks, Arthur. And I think you set the stage quite nicely to explain why CCS are needed and what energy companies such as Chevron are doing to make that happen, and where that belongs in their overall climate strategy. I want to go next to JP and get your sense on, against the backdrop that Arthur described. From a regulatory point of view, what is needed to make that happen, and what are the opportunities and challenges from a legal and a regulatory point of view?
Sure. So very briefly, I think one of the challenges associated with CCS project is then when you think about it for a second, a CCS project is really traditionally what you would think as three separate projects, right? You typically have, unless it's a DAC, which is a standalone facility, you typically need a capture facility, which is co-located to an existing source. So normally that will trigger a permit amendment at the source level, which has its own, host of issues. Then the facility needs to be built with capital, and there are some technology risks, although the technology is pretty well known. The second component, obviously, is a transportation, right? In some cases, there's no transportation if the source is, in close proximity to the sink. There is, the pore space where the CO2 will be injected or sequestered into, right? But in a lot of cases, the CO2 needs to move, miles, right? So a pipeline needs to be planned, right-of-ways need to be acquired. The pipeline needs to be built. There are costs associated with that. So that's the second project, right? And then the third project, of course, is the injection, facilities. Now, Tony will tell us about Oxy, and Oxy obviously has a lot of existing, injection wells. So if you're lucky enough to have a project that has, Oxy or maybe Chevron as a partner, then, maybe the injection component is not something you need to worry too much about. But if you are in a location where there's no traditional injection of CO2 activities, a new well needs to be drilled, right? And the process associated with, siting and getting the permits associated with a CO2 injection well is very complicated in the US. It typically triggers for a sequestration well, what is called a Class 6 permit application process. The EPA is currently inundated with applications for Class 6 permits. The timeline is probably like a 2-year window for the permit issuance. And to this day, there's only one permit that has been issued, and it's the ADM permit. So obviously another challenge. These projects are costly. They can be $1 billion to $5 billion, depending on the size. But they also raise, from a regulatory perspective, significant hurdles.
Thank you. We'll move now to Kel and Tony to start looking at the implementation side of things, and at what different companies are doing to make these projects happen in the real world. So I'll get Kel's take first, and then I'll go to Tony on what their companies are doing to implement CCUS or DAC projects.
Perfect, thanks. So one of the themes that I heard today and this week was talking about when is direct air capture coming, what future technology state is it at? And I can only speak as the technology provider for carbon engineering, but I hope at the end of this conversation, you realize that we're in the commercial state. It's not a future. It's not a future technology. It's a now technology. So for those of you who might not be familiar with carbon engineering, we're a Canadian-based clean technology company headquartered in Squamish, BC, beautiful British Columbia, Canada. And we still think of ourselves as a startup, and I think we're often still referenced as a startup, but we were founded in 2009 by Professor David Keith with the mission of commercializing direct air capture at a climate relevant scale. And our core expertise is developing this technology to be able to remove carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere. Once we've removed that technology, we can store it safely, securely, and permanently underground where it came from. And so from the beginning, we set this climate relevant scale goal. And I want to just walk you very quickly through how we got there. So in 2015, we commissioned our pilot plant, received a bunch of data from that, we're able to iterate. We scaled up to our innovation center, which we started construction and commissioning on in 2021, ran that, got some great data, went into engineering for our first commercial plant. And our first commercial plant will go into construction in 2022 with our partner 1.5. And this is real, this is now. And so our first commercial plant will be 1 megaton at full build. So we're capable right now of deploying direct air capture plants at a commercial scale. Our big challenge now is plant financing. And I know all project types have a problem with financing, but I wanted to just level set what direct air capture means, because there's obviously a variety of technologies in here. Direct air capture from carbon engineering is an industrial scale climate infrastructure. Industrial scale climate infrastructure. And you referenced it earlier about how big these are. So for carbon engineering, broad strokes, think 100 acres, think $1 billion of capital, and think a 30-year time run on these projects. So these are also being driven exclusively by climate policy demand for net zero targets and are dependent on carbon market revenue. So for us, in order to go faster, we need revenue certainty and demand. We need to make larger markets and firm them up, because right now what we're seeing is the voluntary market is small and the compliance markets don't de-risk enough for investors to be able to make a bet on large scale climate infrastructure. And so a couple of things that On the policy side, because that's my background, when I'm thinking about ways to move the dial on this, one of them could be that we need to really recognize true net zero. We're still kind of talking about emissions reductions versus carbon dioxide removals, and really carbon dioxide removals need to be treated completely separately than emissions reductions. 1 plus -1 is how you get to 0. That's just the math. And so we need to support the carbon dioxide removals differently. And those supports could be a variety of things, whether it's the United States doing the tax credits, whether it's Europe doing contract for difference. But the other piece is we need to recognize that this support, in order to scale down this technology, is needed in addition to carbon revenue from carbon markets. The second thing that I think would be super helpful is decoupling this, linking the supply and demand, because for carbon engineering, one of our unique attributes is your point of emission is decoupled from your point of removal. And so therefore we can go out and find great sites with geological potential and high renewable energy potential and deploy there. So if you have geographically agnostic policies, then that allows us to go seek those great site conditions. An example of that from my fuels background is if you have a low carbon fuel policy, you're often rewarding your feedstock on its environmental attributes and not necessarily its point of origin. One of the last points is I think we need to think differently about how market flexibility can support these large climate infrastructure facilities. So you have these multi-decade running plants that will need to have the optionality to play in multiple markets. So one plant might need to generate credits in a compliance system or a voluntary system, or potentially use that CO2 for fuel. And so making sure that there's obviously guardrails and double counting, but recognizing that these multi-decade facilities will need revenue flexibility in order to be viable. And lastly, we really do need to look at integrating removals into international policy frameworks. We're seeing that in a couple of different spaces where the technology is moving faster than a lot of the administration of these climate policy frameworks. And so whether it's Article 6 or NDCs or NIRs, we need to understand how we can move removals into those spaces, because a lot of countries are making DAC part of their net zero plans, or many companies are. And so we need to really figure out how to have those larger frameworks keep pace with our technology. And so lastly, Arthur mentioned partnerships, but I wanted to say for us at Carbon Engineering, partnerships have been so core for us to get where we are today. So whether it's investment, or whether it's plant partners that are deploying our technology, or whether it's offtake partners, and I won't steal Tony's thunder to talk about the offtake partners, but these partnerships are how we got viability on our first plant. And in order to do that, to move to the next plants, we really do need more partnerships, and then also these great policy and incentives really to scale up the carbon removal with direct air capture.
Thanks for that, and we'll keep on moving down the value chain of this technology to look at deployer. And Tony.
So we're really excited because we have broken ground on the first real commercial scale direct air capture facility. It's going to be located out in West Texas. It's going to be 500,000 tons of capture every year to initially start, but can be scaled up to 1 million tons per year. And so what got us going on this, right? And what got us going on this great partnership with Carbon Engineering? It's really this sort of 50-year history, actually. And what's unique about Oxy is that we're actually the largest consumer buyer of CO2 as a raw material, right? So we've been doing this for 50 years, injecting CO2 into enhanced oil recovery reservoirs. And so we understand how to safely and securely inject CO2 into rock formations, right? And so what we really like to think about is, what does Oxy look like as a carbon management company? What does Oxy look like in the energy transition? And where our core capabilities are best suited, right? Where we're still going to need geophysicists, we're going to need petroleum engineers to understand the subsurface. We're going to need to know how to drill wells. That's in CCS, right? And so that's where we're bringing our core capabilities to. And I think that's why we're going to be very successful in this endeavor. So like I mentioned, we're breaking ground on this first 500,000 ton per year capture facility out in West Texas. Like Kel was saying, that there's a lot of different moving parts here that are very important. JP also mentioned that the rest of the value chain. So capturing the CO2 is one aspect of it. But where Oxy really excels, right, is going to be certifying that CO2 has been injected and securely, safely stored down there really over geologic time. And so this isn't new to us, like I've mentioned. We've been reporting under a US EPA monitoring, reporting, and verification plan for about a decade, right? And so this is how you actually generate a 45Q tax credit. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with 45Q tax credits, it was recently enhanced further with the IRA. And so for direct air capture specifically, when you're going into saline formations, which is what we plan on doing, you get $180 per metric ton. So a really big incentive for direct air capture coming out of the IRA. It's going to be really important for scaling this technology. So you have the reservoir, you have the US EPA MRV plan. You can also certify that same reservoir for California programs. So the LCFS program has a pathway for direct air capture. So you can sequester CO2 under their CCS protocol in Texas or really anywhere in the world and generate an LCFS credit. That's another component of the revenue here. And then finally, like we were talking about on the voluntary basis. So this is another area that Oxy was very interested in early on and de-risking. And so we founded the CCS Plus initiative. And so this is really the most expansive methodology writing project ever, bringing in stakeholders from industry to emitters to NGOs and so forth to understand and write down in these methodologies, how do you prove secure geologic storage? How do you generate a baseline for these projects? And so that's being inserted into Vera. And so Vera is partnering with us on that. One of the big deals that we've announced so far for this first direct air capture facility is really a partnership with Airbus. And so Airbus sees direct air capture as something that's going to be a very important decarbonization tool for aviation. So when we think about direct air capture, the industries you really should be focused on, at least initially, is aviation, marine, heavy duty trucking, the very hard to decarbonize industries where EVs might not penetrate, hydrogen might not penetrate, at least in the time frame that's relevant for climate change here. And so Airbus purchased 400,000 credits, direct air capture removal credits from 1.5, which is the CCS entity of Oxy, and has since actually redistributed has signed LOIs with 8 different airlines on a voluntary basis, ranging from Lufthansa to KLM to Air France. So we really see this as something that's getting adopted in aviation. We're also very interested in working with the tech industry. Obviously, they've announced big plans about historical emissions, underpinning technologies like direct air capture. And we're really hopeful that other industries like marine follow suit in terms of getting behind direct air capture. I think I can pause there and maybe we can get into some Q&A.
Yeah, thanks for that. And this will hopefully give you a sense of how the value and supply chain of CCUS and DAC works in the real world. I will be opening the floor for Q&A in a second. So start thinking about what you might want to ask to the panel. I'll kick us off briefly, building on a couple of remarks from Tony and Kel. And I actually wanted to bring back what we just discussed in the context of carbon markets across the compliance and voluntary space, domestic and international. And this is a question for any panelists that want to take it. But where do you see, the most promising opportunities for help deploying CCUS or DAC in the carbon market space? And what, if not, what is missing to get there? And Kel, I know that you already remarked on that, so feel free to expand if you want, or I'd be happy for anyone else to come on in on that point.
So what we're hoping to see is that the voluntary market continues to grow as it's projected to. As Tony mentioned, we have a lot of great off takers, but we will need the compliance systems to step in to be able to have that long-term demand signal for us, because that's what large facilities go for on final investment decision. That's whatever large facility you're doing, you need that demand signal for long-term. And so compliance systems that can integrate, we've seen the really creative solutions within California where you're integrated into a fuel standard. We're hoping that that continues to go, because those will be needed to scale the compliance market. And the thing about direct air capture credits is that they're, for the most part, from an LCA perspective and certification perspective, they're going to be identical in either market. And so for us, we're really just going to be looking to generate high quality credits and then finding those markets to be able to land them. The Canadian system just had announced within the last few months that they're going to be doing a direct air capture standalone protocol, which is fantastic, because that's going to be showing that there's demand. But in terms of being able to understand that market, it's still quite small when you're looking at a megaton plant. So I think scaling the markets as fast as we can, and then understanding Article 6 a bit more, so that we could figure out how to be able to move that finance between places that really would like to deploy but don't have the right site conditions, and then countries that might want the economic benefits of having jobs and innovation with direct air capture that might have ideal site conditions.
Thank you. Tony, JP, or Arthur?
You go first, and then
So I'll make one remark, which is I think, you know, I did my first CCS deal in 2007 when I was at a bank, and we used a protocol which actually still exists. It's the Acr Eor Protocol, right? So what's interesting is we're in 2022 and the protocol has not been revamped, but it is in the process of being revamped. ACR will issue its new protocol in the coming weeks, or if not month. So that will help, Stefano. You know, there's obviously the CCS Plus initiative that Tony mentioned. So I think these two methodologies will help, you know, finally create real offsets on third-party registries that can be then traded when they result from CCS projects. But what all of this indicates now, I'm not sure if everyone, well, I'm sure everyone has picked up on that, but just to reiterate the point, right? When we talk about carbon pricing, especially in NAITA, right? You know, we look at carbon pricing maps, you know, it is interesting to note that the highest carbon pricing now globally is in the US, right? Because as just described, if you do a project at the right location, you can get a RIN, an LCFS credit, and a 45Q credit, and an offset, right? So when you start stacking up these four environmental attributes for the same activity, you have sources of revenues that incentivize, you know, the type of capital investment that these companies are describing to you today. And it's very interesting to think about how they're structured, right? Because the tax credit is fixed and guaranteed for 12 years. So that gives you, you know, that gives you a certain visibility on your cash flows. But the other incentives, especially the LCFS credit, for example, is one that fluctuate, right? So when you think about how to finance a project, it gives you interesting revenue components that have different characteristics, and that, you know, that can incentivize investments in the space. Tony?
Yeah, I think I'll take just a slightly different angle here, because you guys covered some of the main points. But you know, in talking with customers, this is sort of where the friction is, particularly on the voluntary side of things. Many corporates have set targets and made commitments, but there's really few that are really sophisticated and have put pen to paper on their plans, right? And until they do that, it's difficult for them to make long-term purchase agreements and understand what their reduction plans look like, right? So this is how much I can reduce for my company without buying a removal credit or offset. And until they go through that process, it's difficult to have the conversation with them. And so that's really, you know, some of the friction that we see. And so more and more, you know, education there and getting up to speed on that angle. I think the SEC proposal also on climate disclosures might also accelerate that process, because they are going to be required to not just put those targets out, right? But they're going to have to show what their plan is and actually report on that plan over time.
Yeah, I think clearly I agree with JP. I mean, he made excellent points about the stacking of attributes, and also others have made some points about accounting as well. I think the for us the great work that CCS plus, I think the accounting framework has to be clear, and all the players in the value chain should have their responsibilities for the contributions they've made to the tons that are sequestered. So I think all that clarification, the framework and development of these transparency kind of provisions, if you will, are all very important, and we look forward to the successful completion of all of those. Thanks.
Thank you. Floor is open. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and Sam will go around.
Thank you for the beautiful panel. I'm Svenja from Base Carbon. We are originators. I originate CDR. And I have two questions. One is really focused on the infrastructure component, because there's so much talk about technology on the DAC side, but I've worked with the DOE and Carbon Bird on DAC hub development. And the infrastructure component is really the different side of the coin, where I see a lot of lack of improvement and technology, the technology component in those really hard to find parts of those projects. So my first question would be, do you see any sort of potential to be basically retrofit existing pipelines that are currently not being utilized, especially in the Middle East, northern UAE, oil gas fields that are not being utilized, so the retrofitting component? And the second question I have is really more focused on the policy component, especially addressing Article 6. And I think it's going to be interesting under Article 6.4 right now. Really, the methodology is being developed, really focused on nature-based solutions. But thinking about CDR and especially technology-based solutions, what you mentioned, generation of income, jobs. So really thinking out of the box on the CDR side, that it's not just the carbon removal, but it also brings social and economical benefits to communities. And so I would love to hear, I guess, from Tony and Keith.
Thanks. Maybe let's take a couple of questions before we get back to the panel. There's one there, another one there. Oh, Janet at the back. And
hey guys, two questions. Kathleen from Clear Sky Investments. One, JP, can you talk more about the stacking of attributes? And I guess I didn't realize that you could also get an offset credit if you were getting LCFS and RINs credits. So do you think that there are possible implications of that additionality? And do you think that those additional credits will actually be allowed in any for voluntary purpose, I guess? And my other question is for the DAC and CCS developers. Yeah, it's a huge capital investment. So just right now, like, what is your cost on a dollars per ton basis? And what does that price look like? And what kind of price do you need to move forward with these projects? And then how do you see technology improving so that obviously the price becomes cheaper?
good. Let's get them all in the interest of time, and then we'll get back to the panel. So there's one from first table here, one there, and then Janet, and then we'll close there.
Yeah, Pawan Mehra from C Carbon. I think Kathleen took one of my questions. The predicted price of carbon, the marginal cost. The second one was also, can you guys comment on the permitting process and how long that's taking, and what that looks like?
Thank you. Christoph and Janet.
I'm Christoph from Southport. I have to make one comment, which is we launched at the World Economic Forum the next generation carbon removal facility, which hopefully addresses one of your problems. It's a buyers club consisting of UBS, BCG, Swiss Re, Mitsui Shipping, and LGT Bank, and can be joined by others as well. So we can actually make long-term commitments and purchase the certificates of such projects. And that's from a perspective of a corporate, it's a better hedge than just doing it one corporate at a time.
Thank you, Janet, and then we'll go back to the panel. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so, California's governor just signed a piece of legislation that says no EOR for CCS, right? So effectively banned EOR for CCS. How do you think that's going to impact the LCFS pathway?
Good. I think there's enough meat on the grill, so maybe we'll go along the panel again, starting from Tony this time, and feel free to address the
Yeah, there's a lot to
you-
remember there.
Yeah. I think we
Maybe we'll go in order. Okay. So what was with the DOE earlier this week, right? So for everyone's context here, with the infrastructure bill, there's $3.5 billion of grants for DAC hubs. So that means you're putting a 1 million ton per year DAC facility with a dedicated sequestration at a saline formation, right? And so that is really what is needed from an infrastructure perspective, right? For all of CCUS, right? Because there is very much this chicken or the egg issue when it comes to developing these projects, right? It's complex value chain, particularly with point source emitters, right? And so the idea here is you anchor these hubs with volumes you can bring from the air effectively, right? And then what that means is in that region, it's going to help bring in other industrial volume. So it's an awesome project that the government's putting forth, and we look forward to that FOA here pretty shortly. So to answer your question on pipelines, right? So we are looking at, well, first, we control a lot of CO2 pipelines out in West Texas already, but there are other areas where natural gas pipelines can be converted to transporting CO2, right? You generally transport CO2 at a supercritical phase, right? About 1900 PSI, whereas that's not typically where your natural gas pipelines, their pressure is. And so what that means basically is that you can just carry less on that pipeline if it's at like 900 PSI. We are seeing some deals to do that. It is a question of, where does that pipeline lead to, right? So repurposing it, where does it start? Where does it end? Can we use it? Should I keep going with the other questions or?
Yeah, if you feel like it.
Okay, we've disclosed this, so you can find on our website our cost structure, right? So this first DAC facility is to prove out the commerciality that you can go big, right? So it's a first of a kind project, right? And so the cost range for levelized cost of capture, which includes the direct air capture facility, the dedicated sequestration facility, that range is $300 to $425 per metric ton. So that's the cost, right? And so that includes a cost of capital in there. So there's a revenue component. To cover that cost, right? You would have, the tax credit, and then you'd be stacking an additional environmental attribute, whether that's from the compliance or the voluntary market. So you need that much revenue to be able to cover. So 180 plus more to get to that $400 level, I would say. Where is it going? So we also disclose this on the slide, right? So by the nth plant, this is when sort of cost plateau over time. Just think sort of 10 years from now, something like that, right? You're looking at a range of $125 to $175 per metric ton. We see this as really important for the cost abatement curve, right? Like right now, like I mentioned earlier, this is an alternative to higher cost things, let's say in like aviation, right? Where if you look at a sustainable aviation fuel, the inherent sort of carbon abatement cost within that fuel is anywhere from $250 to $2,000, right? And so that's what we're really comping this against, and that's how the customers perceive it. The other thing that's really interesting, right, is that you're doing these removal credits, you're decarbonizing industry transportation today, but really where we're headed is CO2 as a feedstock. And Arthur got on this a little bit, right? So we just don't want to be pumping CO2 as a raw material into reservoirs and not doing anything with it. What the aviation industry sees today is that a power to liquids process, where you're taking that CO2 feedstock from that direct air capture facility, using hydrogen with that and converting that to a sustainable aviation fuel. They see that as a very big part of their decarbonization plans.
grab the next one. I think there was just one policy question, so I only had to remember one, which was fantastic. Oh. So Tony would cover our cost question because we as a technology provider, we defer to our plant developers on cost because each one of them is going to have unique characteristics. So on the policy, this is something I'm very excited about. So I've been following 6.4 and there is active discussions on where removals will fit within those methodologies. I know there's meetings going on in Bonn and I've been working with AIDA to try to understand like where we can support that this is something that they should be considering now. But what I was really excited about was the UN Industrial Development Organization, UNDO, what invited a group of experts just last month to this, all people that were doing carbon dioxide removal to get a level set. So I went to go, well, I didn't get to go speak there. I got to do it virtually at 3 a.m. But level setting, this is where the technologies are so that they could evaluate, we gave a lot of information about jobs and potential supply chain build out, about all of these different opportunities as you do that, potentially using carbon dioxide credits as an export. So there is beginning understanding and interest. And so we're working to be able to provide that information into those forums so that they can help understand where those opportunities are.
Thank you, JP.
I think we go to.
Let's go to Arthur then
first.
All right. Thank you, JP. I think I'll try to address, I think, the theme of most of the questions here with the theme of what I actually tried to say earlier. The technology development efforts that Chevron is doing really follows a theme, or if you will, a strategy, longer term strategy of looking at different kinds of capture technologies, different kinds of areas where CCS can really be deployed on not only on a project by project basis, but also on a hub basis, industrial hubs, so that there would be both carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So that's how I would address most of the questions that were asked today. I think for us, it's really about scaling up the technologies. So we are looking at these as a longer term play. Yes, there is cost, of course, but the fact is that there are now incentives that are at a level that I think will really help our industry and society scale up the carbon capture and utilization and geologic storage. So thanks.
Any final thoughts from your side before we close?
Well, I think Lisa gave us the sign.
Yeah, I was being relaxed about time because I thought we were going to do the coffee break, but they do need to rearrange the room. So I'm afraid we have to come to a close. Then again, I mean, we are moving into the coffee break, so feel free to stalk the panelists over a coffee break.